Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Parsha of the Month Club, where we hear from the rabbis and cantors in secular humanistic Judaism. And today we're excited to welcome Rabbi Jeffrey Falick, but I will read his bio in a moment. I first want to explain a bit about this program if this is your first time or if you're watching it on YouTube. This is kind of a thank you on behalf of SHJ, the Society for Humanistic Judaism, for you all as members and donors to our movement. As you may know, many of our programs are free and open to everybody, but we are a nonprofit organization. We rely on donations and membership to keep us going. So this is a program for members and donors, and we very much appreciate your support. We would welcome you to let other people know about our movement. We have entry points that are even easier access than full membership, including subscription to Humanistic Judaism magazine starting at $25 a year on our website, shj.org. And we would welcome you to share the word about what our movement is about. And these programs provide a little bit of an idea of who our leaders and thought leaders are in our movement. So today, we're very lucky to be joined by Rabbi Jeffrey Falick. He has served as rabbi of the Congregation for Humanistic Judaism of Metro Detroit, formerly the Birmingham Temple, since 2013. Rabbi Falick became involved in secular humanistic Judaism in 2009 after a lifetime of searching and questioning. His involvement in our movement includes his roles on boards and executive committees of the Association of Humanistic Rabbis and the Society for Humanistic Judaism. Rabbi Falick received his BA from the University of Texas at Austin, which explains part of his background, and his MA and ordination from the Reform Movement's Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion in Cincinnati, Ohio. He previously served as director of Hillel Jewish Student Centers at universities in Illinois and Miami, and at the Jewish Community Center in Miami. As a Jewish educator, Rabbi Falick has served as a faculty member at numerous schools and programs, including the Melton School and several congregational and community-wide youth programs. He is also very active in the secular humanistic world and was recognized for his intra-humanistic organizational efforts with the 2018 Freethinker of the Year Award by the Center for Inquiry, Michigan.
Okay, I think that's enough. That's fine.
I will. That
It's
was
also
it.
my old bio.
Well, I'm sorry. I pulled it from last year. You got to send me an updated one.
It's on our website.
Okay. I'm removing
This,
my
by the way, is
spotlight.
not a background. This is my house.
That's what I mean. Yeah,
Yeah, this
your
is I
decor.
am, and just to be clear, this is the largest collection of Longhorn in anywhere in Michigan, and I am the president of the Michigan Texas X's, the Alumni Association. So,
That's wonderful for
which is
you.
more important to me than a lot of other things, but
So I will have to throw the go blue before I remove my spotlight. Okay.
I don't know. Seems like we've been beating you a lot. Okay.
Mm,
Well, thank you for this opportunity. This is, I'm a little nervous and I'm looking forward to it as well. This happens to be Tisa. That's the Parsha. It's a couple weeks old, but since it's the Parsha of the Month Club, Paul gives us a lot of leeway to decide where we want to situate ourselves. We're going to be talking about one of the most famous stories in the Torah and one that undoubtedly you know. And in order to do that, we're going to have a lot of text. Can you see it?
it says you. Yeah, there it goes.
Okay. So the other thing I have to do is somehow get rid of all of you. Okay. Not, in any kind of unhealthy way. But here we go. All right. So you know this story. But I think now that I've got this shared, I think that I'm going to just give you a tiny little bit of introduction to how the Torah came to be. So one of the things that we talk about in biblical scholarship is the four source theory or the documentary hypothesis. Now, I know this is not a perfect kind of theory, but it definitely still holds. And there's some great books that have been recently written about the fact that what they figured out over 100 years ago or so really does sort of match at least what I like to call the four trunk texts of the Torah. And there are some that are older, some that are more recent, some that one in particular that was just for the priestly class, and they're known as JEPD. We're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I want you to be aware of it because I think it's a good reminder that the Torah itself was written over a long period of time and reflects different times and ages and different concerns. And while we don't believe that the stories tend to be certainly not factually true, they sometimes do reflect some very important issues that may have been going on in society at the time. And that's where we're going to be going today. The other little preface I want to make is a note about the Levites. So the Levites are, of course, the priestly class of the 12 tribes of Israel. There are, however, a lot of internal contradictions in the Torah and the Tanakh, the entire Hebrew Bible, about who exactly was a priest. We know today that there's a priestly tribe. It's one of the, really, it's one of the only tribes that we can truly identify anymore, to the extent that this is accurate, and I think it's fairly accurate. You know that if perhaps you've walked into a traditional synagogue and been asked whether you are a Cohen or a Levi. Those are both members of the Levite tribe. Cohen simply means priest, and Levite means a member of that tribe. But at some point, there was one little group of the Levites who became the Cohens. Not the Cohens that live down the street from you, but they're part of that. But they became the Cohens, and those were the people who were said to have been descended from Aaron. And Aaron is a key figure in our story today. They are also called, because one of Aaron's ancestors gave them as well his name, the Tzadokites, from a priest, a high priest named Zadok or Tzadok in Hebrew. And if you've heard the word Sadducee in your life, then you probably know or may know that the word Sadducee is a corruption of the word Tzadokite or Tzadoki. There were other priestly groups too. There's even what seems to be a firstborn type of Levite in the Torah and in the in later narratives as well about the two kingdoms. In any case, I wanted you to have that as background. And I'm sorry I'm speaking fast, and if you're putting this on double play on YouTube, it's going to be even faster. But now what I'd like to do is talk about the story. And as I said, I think you all know it. So this story, probably one of the most iconic in the Bible. When the people saw that Moses was taking so long in coming down from the mountain, so he's gone up there ostensibly to receive commandments. We always say the 10 Commandments, but that's not entirely clear from the narrative, but he's going up there talking to God. The people gathered against Aaron and said to him, "Come, make us a god who shall go before us. Make us an El who shall go before us, for we do not know what has happened to Moses, the man who brought us up from the land of Egypt." So he's been up there a while. Aaron said to them, "Take off the gold rings that are on the ears of your wives, your sons, and your daughters, and bring them to me." And all the people took off the gold rings that were in their ears and brought them to Aaron. Then he took from them and cast in a mold, so that's a molten kind of thing, and made it into a molten calf. And they exclaimed, "This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt." And then exclaimed, sorry, there's a typo there. When Aaron saw this, he built an altar before it, and Aaron announced, "Tomorrow shall be a festival of Yahweh," usually translated as the Lord or the Eternal. Early next day, the people offered up burnt offerings and brought sacrifices of well-being. They sat down to eat and drink and then rose to dance. Yahweh spoke to Moses, "Hurry down, for your people whom you have brought out of the land of Egypt have acted basely," acting terribly. "They have been quick to turn away from the way that I enjoined them upon them. They have made themselves a molten calf and bowed low to it and sacrificed to it, saying, 'This is your God, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt.'" Yahweh further said to Moses, "I see that this is a stiff-necked people." Some of you who work professionally with Jews or are lay leaders know that already very well. "Now let me be that my anger may blaze forth against them, and that I may destroy them and make of you a great nation." But Moses implored Yahweh his God, saying, "Let not your anger, O Yahweh," sorry, I was changing eternal one and so forth, so that's why I got a typo here and there, "blaze forth against your people whom you have delivered from the land of Egypt with great power and with a mighty hand. Let not the Egyptians say it was with evil intent that he delivered them, only to kill them off in the mountains and annihilate them from the face of the earth. Turn from your blazing anger and renounce the plan to punish your people. Remember your servants, Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, Jacob, how you swore to them by yourself and said to them, 'I will make your offspring as numerous as the stars of heaven. I'll give your offspring the whole land of Israel, which I spoke to possess forever.' And Yahweh renounced the punishment planned for the people. Thereupon Moses turned and went down from the mountain bearing the two tablets inscribed on both sides and so forth. And I think you know the rest of it. So just in the interest of time, we're going to flash ahead, but I might go back and read some of this, or at least quote some of this as we proceed. So I'm going to turn off the share for a moment, and hopefully I'll be able to get back to it easily. So I mentioned the JEP and D. No one agrees who wrote this. A lot of people say it was the e-source. And there's reasons for that I'm not going to get into. We just don't have the time. But I actually think this is an independent source. I think this is one of those stories that got stuck in because it had resonance, and because we know that the end of it is that God tells Moses about it, and Moses convinces God not to destroy this stiff-necked people. And that really is and then he ultimately smashes the tablets. So I think you knew that part too, even though I kind of rushed through it. So this story had to have been iconic to have been left in the Torah. There was no reason that the final editors of the Torah, whatever hand was involved, had to leave this there. There's a lot of oddities here, and many of them surround Moses. Surround Aaron. For instance, Aaron is generally a hero. He's generally thought of as being a very, very important person. He is the one for whom the strand or the genealogy of the Aaronides, the ones who became the Kohanim, is named. If you take a look, this was Exodus 32. If you take a look at Exodus 25 through 31 and 35 through 40, which are essentially a continuous unit about building the tabernacle in the wilderness, which is the carry out temple, the carry around temple. This very clearly interrupts the narrative. This whole thing with going up to the mountain and getting the commandments and so forth interrupts that really lengthy narrative. And so that's another little kind of hint that this story was placed here strategically. Doesn't seem to belong here. All of the other sections that we're seeing about specifically the tabernacle come from the priestly source, because that's what they were concerned with. Sacrifices and how to make them and what setting to make them in and how the tabernacle should look, and ultimately that later informs how the temple will look. All of them, all of the P texts, the ones surrounding this and the ones that are pretty much the entirety of Leviticus and other parts of the Bible as well, it's not just Leviticus, they glorify Aaron. I mean, he is the big hero here. And so you're reading this and suddenly, what? This comes? Well, Aaron is certainly not, well, shall we say, a big hero here. The story has other problems too. There's just little inconsistencies. This idea that they had enough gold jewelry, even though there were a whole bunch of them, to do this, well, leaving aside the origin stories of that jewelry, which is that somehow they hypnotized the Egyptians into giving them all their jewelry, which is far-fetched and really narratively weird, as they were coming out of Egypt. When they decided to build the tabernacle, again, coming before this story, at least in the order of the Torah, they already used all that gold. How much gold could there possibly be that they're schlepping around? There's not that much gold in the world. So it's just really a problematic story in a lot of ways. The biggest problem, of course, of all of this is one that the early biblical critics would not have necessarily understood, because that took a little bit more archaeological evidence and other kinds of discussions and learnings that we've had over the years. And they really boil down to this. And this, by the way, you should know, is a difficult thing to teach a more traditional group, and I've had to do that before. But it boils down to this. What is the problem with a calf or a calf? Which, by the way, or calves, which, by the way, is just a way of saying a smaller bull. What is the problem? Why are they so reviled? Well, we don't think they always were. And that's an important thing that we have to understand. So we have to look at what the role of the calf, of the bull, was in the ancient Canaanite, Israelite neighborhood, including themselves. Animal figures played a very, very strong role in depicting things, about deities or in representing deities themselves. So how do we know this? Well, we know this because of, as I mentioned, a lot of the archaeology that's been done. It was really common iconography for these Near Eastern gods. Why bulls? Bulls are enormously, enormously powerful. This was probably one of the most powerful creatures that they could have even imagined in their era, in their area. And so, of course, they were powerful symbols of gods. In Egypt, there was a bull, Apis, who was the symbol of Ptah. I'm just reading this. I don't know much about it. But it's a creator god in Memphite theology. In the Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh, one about which I know a little bit more, the bull of heaven, as it's called, is a favorite animal of Ishtar and the symbol of the generator of the world, the moon god. The moon crescents, don't forget, look a little bit like, well, I guess you could turn to that bull behind me. He is a steer, but he's actually a bull. And you see, that looks a little bit like the crescent of the moon. And it goes on and on and on. We see it in Greek mythology and so forth. Probably the most relevant to what we're talking about is the Canaanite pantheon, because we believe that the god El, which is our god, the god El was originally part of the Canaanite pantheon because the original Israelites are Canaanites. He is referred to as not just El, but sometimes as Tor or Shor in Hebrew. El meaning in Ugaritic, the bull El. This is something we see all over the place. Israelites worshipped El. It's only later, at some point, that Yahweh, who is a god associated with areas much closer to Egypt, that Yahweh becomes identified with El and one with El. So that we say, well, we don't, but we hear in our tradition, Baruch atah Adonai, praises are you, Yahweh, El, our God. Yahweh El, one God. And that's a whole other lesson, and one that we could have class after class after class in this. And we found examples of small and large types of El bulls throughout Israelite areas. Chatzor, there's a famous one. Bilam, or Balaam, he's usually called in English, the prophet who is called upon to curse Israel in the Torah, but then winds up praising Israel quite by accident. We actually have in our congregation a version of that song we do, Ma Tovu Oholecha. We changed the words, of course, but the Ma Tovu Oholecha part we like. How goodly are your tents, O Jacob. And what did he go on to say in Numbers? He refers to El, who brings them out of Egypt, being like the horns of a wild bull for them. I don't know if you've ever seen these pictures of children sitting on the horns of a bull. I think in India you sometimes see kids doing that, but that's a pretty good example of what was in the imagination of the writer who wrote the blessing of Bilam. Even the Torah gives its okay, by the way, to depictions of animals. It's just not this animal. This animal it has a problem with. And so what I want to do now is to introduce you to to one in particular. Now, this isn't specifically an animal. It's a little bit different because it's a combo, one of those animals that mixes with a person. And we call them in Hebrew chruvim, but in Hebrew they're called cherubs. And in the Bible, they could include sphinx. Well, in Near Eastern iconography, that includes sphinxes. And one such sphinx, they're not always built the same way, is the cherub, in fact, two cherubs that guard over or are depicted as guarding over the Ark of the Covenant. Now, I've found that one of the greatest teaching tools is having Indiana Jones readily available for people's pop culture reference to this, and then I don't have to get the picture. But you remember how the angels, they called them, were sort of over the ark like that. Cherubs were okay. And I have the text. I'll just read it to you, but and then we'll just skip through it on the text. But it talks about how when they were making the ark, that they were made of two cherubs of gold, hammered. Maybe that was the problem, which was the calf in our story that we're looking at was molded. Apparently, that was a big issue, whether you could hammer or mold. But in any case, There were two cherubs from the dais at its two sides, and the two cherubs spreading their wings above, covering over it with their wings and their faces towards each other. So you may not, well, you say, oh, they're not exactly animals, but they're definitely, I think you could call them idols. Our rules about iconography in present day Judaism, traditional Jews are quite disturbed by any depiction of humans, not to mention animals that look like they might be gods in our synagogue, so, or anywhere for that matter. So whatever it was that allowed it, the difference had something to do more with this story than with any actual taboo. At least that's my thinking. The most important thing to take away from this, though, is that the cherubs and the calves have both been depicted throughout the Near East as a throne for the gods. And that makes them good symbols for the gods themselves. And if you think about how we might discuss a king by simply portraying the throne or just portraying the crown, it's not so very different to use an object highly associated with that position and saying that this is your God, O Israel. And that's exactly what the people say. And it doesn't really violate even the idea of making a graven image to the God. It doesn't violate even the Ten Commandments. And we know that too, because in the next verse, and we did just read this, what happens next? They say, Chag la Yahweh machar. Tomorrow shall be a festival of Yahweh. And so the next day, when they're supposedly worshiping this calf, read against the context of all of this that we now know, it's really clear that they're sacrificing to Yahweh. So what's the problem? What is going on here? Why is this story depicted as such a sin? How did it get in the Torah? Why is it placed where it's placed? Well, not all of the same hands did all of these things. But what I want to talk about now is not necessarily the calf, at least not this one. I want to talk about another calf, two calves, built by a king named Jeroboam. So we're going to read another story now, and this is not from the Torah, and hopefully I will do the share correctly. And you see it? I can't see you, so you have to tell me. Okay.
We see.
All right. So we're going to go way into the future, our past, but their future, to the period of the post-Solomonic kingdom. So I hope that you all know that King David is the first of the line, the Davidic line of kings in Judah, but also Israel. This was, according to the text, a united kingdom of the 12 tribes. We're not sure if historically that's correct, but certainly there were two kingdoms at one point, and this is how they got their start. They got their start because Solomon was not the greatest king towards the end, and his son was kind of a putz, more than a putz. And so the northern kingdom came into existence as a breakaway from the southern kingdom because of the abuse at their hands by Solomon's son, Rehoboam. So let's learn about the guy who took over from him. His name was Jeroboam. He is the one who led the revolt. He is not a Davidic king. The Judean dynasty will remain Davidic until it disappeared. But this northern kingdom will be a combination of a variety of dynasties, most of which were lost because of wars and infighting, and some of them because God punished the king who attempted to create a new dynasty. And one of those people was Jeroboam. Jeroboam was the son of a man Nevad. He was a member of the tribe of Ephraim, of Zeredah, the son of a widow whose name was Zeruiah, was in Solomon's service. He raised his hand against the king being at this point Rehoboam. The circumstances under which he raised his hand against the king were as follows. Solomon had built the Millo and repaired the breach of the city of his father David. So he was in good stead with these people. The man Jeroboam was very capable. And when Solomon saw that the young man was a productive worker, he appointed him over all the forced labor of the house of Joseph. So he was in charge of the people in the north. That's what we mean by the house of Joseph. And during that time, Jeroboam, who was still in good stead and working for Solomon, went out of Jerusalem and he met a prophet, the prophet Achiah of Shiloh, met him on the way. He put on a new robe, and when the two were alone in the open country, Achiah took a hold of the new robe he was wearing and tore it into 12 pieces. Some nice gift, right? He says, "You take 10 pieces. For thus said Yahweh, the God of Israel, I'm about to tear the kingdom out of Solomon's hands, and I will give you 10 tribes. But one tribe shall remain for the sake of my servant David and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city that I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, for they have forsaken me. They have worshiped blah, 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 all these different gods and so forth. However, I will not take the entire kingdom away from him, but I'll keep him as ruler as long as he lives for the sake of my servant David." So there's going to be two kingdoms. Here, I'll use this as a marker, "but I will take the kingship out of the hands of his son," that's Rehoboam, "and give it to you, the 10 tribes. To his son I will give the one tribe." All right, so that's basically what happened. They split into two, 10 tribes on one side, one tribe on the other. The Levites don't count. We're not even sure they counted at all at this point, but that's where we were. Solomon fell out with Jeroboam. Jeroboam went into Egypt to be saved, and that's what's recorded here. All right, so then we get this kid, Rehoboam, Solomon's heir. So he goes to Shechem, for everybody went to Shechem to acclaim him as king. So he's at his coronation. So Jeroboam now learns about this. He's in Egypt, and he knows now that Solomon is dead, so he can come home. And the people there send for him, and he shows up. But he tells something to Rehoboam that we know that was an actual political issue, clearly, that they were dealing with. "Your father made our yoke heavy." It's kind of funny coming from the guy who was basically in charge of the yoke up in the north. "Now lighten the harsh labor and the heavy yoke that your father laid on us, and we will serve you." All right, so all this kind of thing goes down, and I put this all here because I wanted you to be aware of this being a really long story. But at the end, what basically happened was that the people of Israel felt that Rehoboam was just not going to work for them. Because what does Rehoboam come back with? He says, not only are we not going to ease your burden, we're going to make it worse. So what happens is that they do split. And the reason I'm kind of hemming and hawing here is because I'm trying to wonder where to stop in the text because I keep looking at the time. But they do split. And Rehoboam goes back to Jerusalem, and Jeroboam takes over the hill country going north, and he now runs the north, just like that prophet Achiah had told him that he would. Now Jeroboam, being a good politician, he's now in charge of the larger of the two. He's been assigned this by God, which is a really big honor, right? And he got a whole thing with a robe being torn and all that kind of thing, telling him that God approved of it. What do you think that the last thing that this guy would do would be? Well, I would assume that the last thing that he would do would be to build a golden calf. And yet, this becomes one of the first things that he does. So let me go back to the text again and see if I can show you where that happens. Here it is. So Jeroboam said to himself, "Now the kingdom may well return to the house of David." Why was he worried about that? Well, if they still go up to offer sacrifices at the house of God in Jerusalem, the heart of my people, these people, will turn back to their master, King Rehoboam of Judah. And then they're going to kill me and go back to him. So the king took counsel and made 2 golden calves. He said to the people, "You've been going up to Jerusalem long enough. This is your God, O Israel, who brought you up from the land of Egypt." He put one in Beit El, Bethel, and the other in Dan. Now, Beit El is in the southern part of his kingdom, and Dan is at the very, very north, still the very, very north of Israel. Some of you probably have been there. I did an archaeological dig there. That proved, this is the Bible in 1 Kings speaking, that proved to be a cause of transgression For the people went to worship the calf at Beit El and the one at Dan. He also made cult places. In other words, he built two temples and appointed priests from the ranks of the people who were not of Levite descent. He stationed at Bethel the priests and the shrines that he had made appointed to sacrifice the calves. And he also did something else. He established a festival on the 15th day of the 8th month. In addition to the festival in Judah, he established one at Beit El. The 15th day of the 8th month was considered a return to the old-time religion. Now, we don't have a 15th day of the 8th month anymore, but it is thought by some scholars that this was him simply moving a really important holiday. If you can't guess what the holiday is of the 15th day of the 7th month, when you're about to celebrate it, then he moved it to the 8th month. So all of this looks to us like this is the worst guy on earth, right? But we already know calves were really not a problem in their own context. Nobody who wants to be popular is going to say, you remember that thing that Moses got all tied up in knots about? Go do that. That'll make you popular. That's a great political move, right? I mean, these guys had to be his worst enemies. These guys had to be, writing letters of, or I don't know, going on Tucker Carlson's show to defame the king, what have you. But I can't imagine that this King Jeroboam was so stupid that he didn't know that story, because that is the last thing you would want to do. He was also not so stupid, and the Bible, for all that it tries to depict him as being really mean and stupid, he himself is shown to be trying to be popular. Let's come up with a couple of temples that are more convenient. It's a schlep from the north to Jerusalem. You can't just hop onto a train or get on a bus and go down there. These are pilgrimage festivals. It's not even clear that Jerusalem had any special status as far as being a single place for people to worship. So to place a shrine in the north for Yahweh and one in the south for Yahweh, to put a bull there as a throne, to move a holiday back to where they liked it in the north because it matched their agricultural schedule better. These are all populist moves. These are good things that the king would do. And so this is where we are up to this moment, that it's very possible, I would say it's more than possible, that the story of the golden calf involving Moses and Aaron was written to criticize Jeroboam. That story did not exist before Jeroboam did this. Jeroboam could not have looked back on Jewish history and for some reason thought that the absolute worst transgression ever collectively committed to that point by the Jews was a good idea and that he should do it twice. I refuse to believe that the king, as he is described, and there's great stories about this king as well, that he would have done this. This is a parody. This is a parody. There is, as I've said, so much evidence about the bulls being perfectly okay, that the calf altar cult of the north probably was also being practiced in the south. And if there was a difference between them at this time, it was a difference in how you could build them. Maybe molten versus hammered was important, or what they should look like, cherub versus who knows, because we don't exactly know when the final editing happened and when they decided. But this is not a critique of Aaron. This is a critique of Jeroboam. Now, it does raise a question, though, of why whoever wrote it would have made Aaron the bad guy. Well, I don't think he's quite as bad as he's remembered, and there's a little bit of evidence for that. But this goes back to my preface at the beginning when I mentioned that there were different kinds of priests out there. This idea that all of the Kohanim, the Cohens, that all of the Kohanim are only Levites descended from Aaron and from Aaron's descendant Zadok or Tzadok. Sometimes we call them Aaronites, sometimes we call them Sadokites. They're interchangeable. It's not at all clear that this was a fixed system. The Torah makes like it is, but the Torah also, as I mentioned earlier, has all kinds of other little hints that this is not really what's going on. We have famous stories from the later books of the Bible. It's very clear that this isn't it. And then as I mentioned, some of them weren't even genealogical priests. But let's imagine that there was a Levitical monopoly at this point. Why not the priest that descended from all of the other Levites? I mean, we know that there would only be basically two kinds, right? Depending on how far we wanted to go back. There was Aaron and there was Moshe. There's a very strong, very, very strong argument to be made for the fact that Aaron and Moses in the Torah are pushed together, are edited together as brothers. There's all kinds of textual evidence that they were not actually brothers, they were fellow Levites. The story we have today leaves us with no question about it, but that requires us also to be able to read it in a certain way. Aaron may have been a Levite, and Moses might have been a separate Levite. They may have been two separate heroes who were then merged as brothers. It's not that uncommon to have different stories that merge together, or where one person who might have been more important to one group is in some ways subjugated, or let's say made more minimal, not subjugated, subordinated is the word, to the other. The New Testament has it. John the Baptist was clearly very important and very well known, and there's stories in the New Testament about how Jesus is recognized by John the Baptist as being the greater of the two, not quite brothers. Here we have two brothers that were probably smushed together and created as brothers in certain kinds of stories that we're all familiar with. We call the descendants of Moses, who probably wanted to be Levitical priests themselves or were practicing Levitical priests, Moshites. But we heard earlier that Moshites from the word Moshe, Moses, so that's a way to call it. But we also heard earlier that the story included a critique of Jeroboam that went beyond all of this putting a calf up here and a calf down there and changing a holiday. He was also using non-Levitical priests. So that might have had something to do with this too, because the heroes of the story, the people who did all of the, and I didn't read it to the end there because we just don't have time, but of the story of the golden calf, the one in the Torah, are the Levites. And not Aaron's group, but just the tribe as a whole, which might represent the Mushite Levites, or just the whole group of them. How is it that Aaron and his, obviously not actual descendant, but his presumed descendant, I can't tell you that this guy wasn't real, but there was a priest who is known as the Zadokite, and his name was Aviatar in English or Aviatar in Hebrew. I don't want to go on the whole story about this, but when Solomon was king, he was up and down and all over the place being challenged. A lot of people say, and I think there's some truth here, a lot of scholars say it's very likely Solomon was not David's son, and that's why we're seeing so much of this. Aviatar was also a rebel in the Davidic wars for his dynasty among the brothers. And this Aviatar high priest wasn't a Zadokite because Zadok was his colleague. Zadok was his colleague. We had two high priests, one named Aviatar and one named Zadok. And ultimately, this Aviatar was expelled because he was plotting with a whole other guy I'm not even going to talk to you about, who was another pretender to or aspirant to the Davidic throne. And he was expelled for that, leaving us only with Zadok as the new high priest. And from there on, tracing their Zadokite, their Zadok role model back to Aaron, the Aaronites became the Kohanim. And that's still true to this day. All of Jewish law assumes that to be a Kohen, you have to be a descendant, not just of the Levites, because most of the Levites don't qualify. You have to be specifically a descendant of Aaron, because Zadok was a descendant from Aaron. I know I keep mixing all of the Hebrew and the English together, but I think you all are very sophisticated and can figure out Zadok and Sadok are the same people. So this is the legacy of the story. This is where the story comes from. But now, and just very briefly, I want to talk about the story itself and still do some comparisons to Jeroboam. Because the story has not just a tale of the worst thing that the Jews could ever have done, Israelites, whatever you want to call us, Hebrews, when wandering in the wilderness. I watched the Prince of Egypt with our kids in our Spinoza program the other night. I mean, honestly, that miracle, if I was writing a story about the people who saw it, it would take an awful lot of really critical, a strong critical and almost angry approach to say that a people that saw that just shortly later decided that they were going to do this horrible thing. Well, now we know the horrible thing, as much of the story, of course, didn't happen, but we know that this was probably based on something true that also didn't happen, but was about someone else. Assuming that the original writers had a bone to pick, let's say, with both Jeroboam and the Aaronites, because they picked Aaron to be the bad guy in this. He's not the worst guy, but he's the bad guy. It still doesn't explain why the story came into the final text. We had editors of these texts, right? They had their choice. We know they left things out. We know they left things out because later books of the Bible mention things that we don't see in the Torah. So somebody had access to those stories, and yet they didn't put them in. They kept it out. Whoever was the final editor, and it probably happened in Babylon around 24, 25, 2600 years ago, whoever had their hands in that, they needed to put it in there. There probably were a number of reasons why they had to put it in there. A few of them have to do with the fact of what I just said. These stories were well known. We have a number of versions of them, and I have the text, but I'm looking at the clock and I'm thinking there's only so much we can read. But I think I'm going to pull these up anyway because I can read them through them fast and show you where else the story is mentioned and how it's mentioned differently. All right, so okay, we're going to skip all that. So let's go to Deuteronomy. So the Deuteronomist, who also wrote, or the school of thought of Deuteronomy, also wrote the books of Kings and the books of Samuel, which are also part of that same narrative. This particular writer put into the words of the final speech, which is what Deuteronomy is, the final speech of Moses to the Hebrews, the Israelites, about to enter the land. They put into his mouth this tale as well. And if they were associated with the narrators, I don't know, with the editors, I don't know, but I do know that they wrote it and they rewrote it a little bit differently. So Moses talks about how at Horeb, this is what the Deuteronomist generally calls Sinai, Moses is saying to the people, you provoked Yahweh so much that he wanted me to destroy you. I had come down with the tablets of stone, etc., after I'd been up there for 40 days and 40 nights. And at the end, I got the tablets of stone, and Yahweh said, hurry, go down from here at once, for the people you brought out of Egypt have acted wickedly. They've been quick to stray from the path as I had joined them. They have made themselves a molten image. Yahweh further said to me, I see that this is a stiff-necked people. That happened in the other version of the story. Let me alone and I'll destroy them. And we still get that idea that Moses begs on behalf, and even we get the story that Aaron was responsible for it. It says here, and this is Moses speaking, Yahweh was so angry, he was angry enough with Aaron to have destroyed him. So I also interceded for Aaron at that time. And he goes on to talk about how all that occurred. We also have another version, though, of this story from Psalm 106. The 106th Psalm, probably written in Babylonian exile, tells the story this way, a different writer. They made a calf at Horeb and bowed down to a molten image. They exchanged their glory, meaning God, for the image of a bull that feeds on grass. So we're already here into a heavily monotheistic kind of idea, and we're already here into a very aniconic kind of way of looking at things. They forgot God who saved them, who performed great deeds in Egypt, etc., etc. He would have destroyed them had Moses, his chosen one, confronted him in the breach to avert his destructive wrath. So what do you notice about here? Well, whoever wrote this was not interested in bringing up the Aaron thing again. It suggests maybe people who were already later and who understood that Aaron was the founder of the only legitimate Kohenitic priestly line of Levites. So that's interesting. And it also argues for why this was left in. We get another version here, and this is from Nehemiah, who is a prophet from around the 440s BCE. So, excuse me, here we learn again that they made themselves a molten calf and said, "This is your God who brought you out of Egypt," and so forth, thus committing great impieties. You in your abundant compassion did not abandon them. The pillar of cloud did not depart from them, etc. And here we have absolutely no mention, not of Aaron and not even of Moses. So that may be a very good reason this story was left there. But I think the story was left there mostly because it was meant to teach a lesson. It was meant to teach a lesson about how you accept blame, how you deal with issues of forgiveness. Jeroboam is a putz all the way through. This is a guy who winds up losing the kingdom, and it's not passed on to his line ultimately, and he's just bad, thoroughly bad to the bone. There's nothing good about this guy, and to say there's nothing good about him, the reference by the rabbis to the entire northern kingdom, about whose fate we know, and the writers essentially probably knew, maybe not of the original story, but of those who chose to put it in. It is always attributed, despite all the things that other bad gods like Ahab and queens like Jezebel did in the north, it's always attributed to the sin of Jeroboam, son of Nevat. 100% of the time. He is considered to be uniquely non-repentant. In Exodus, however, in the story that we started with here, Aaron does somehow seems to accept Moses' statement that building the calf was a sin, and he tries to exculpate himself. The people are depicted, by the editorial hand at the very least, as blaming Aaron, but really, and you noticed I got a little confused when I quoted that part of the Bible, who said, "This is your God, O Israel," because it's believed that it was really Aaron who said that, but it was put into the mouth of the people. So Aaron, even in the story we have, I don't want to call this whitewashing, but I do just a little bit want to show that, or believe that that Aaron is making teshuvah here. He's returning from this bad path. So together with the fact that when the people heard that God was about to destroy them, the Torah describes them as going into mourning, no longer wearing their finery, and repenting. And of course, God does what? God forgives. So whatever the reason was that the story was composed, it seems that its effect and its placement, a place that really does not put Aaron at anywhere but the center of all the wonderful things he did. The chapters before it, the chapters that come after it, the tabernacle stuff, this is all Aaron hero worship. And then the entire book that's about to come up after it, Leviticus, completely only the wonders of the Aaronide dynasty. So this is a really this is really a purposefully put story, purposely placed story, and I do believe that a lot of it has to do with teaching forgiveness. That this Yahweh, no matter what we might think about his reality, is certainly depicted as a God who is two things. He gets easily pissed off, so he's kind of like, maybe that short-tempered relative we have, or, maybe ourselves. But like him, we should also find forgiveness. And like him, when we're the transgressors, or like the situation, when we're the transgressors, we will find forgiveness. So this is a great tale of teshuvah, too. The other, of course, reason that I think it's here is because of Jeroboam. In a sort of a flip, the story is put there, written there because of Jeroboam, but it's no longer really politically necessary. It only, at this point, serves the only purpose of reminding you how crappy Jeroboam was, and now to look at the two in contrast. The people of olden days and the rabbis, they knew the Bible really well. These stories were extremely familiar to them. This was their number one storybook. This was their number one source of, in many cases, source of creating new stories and entertainment and what have you. And they didn't do a lot of things by accident. A lot of stories may have arrived in their hands that way, but they really wanted this juxtaposition. They wanted you to see that God forgave a really horrible sin at the very beginning, but that he would never do that again. Because, and I think this is a nice lesson, and I think that this is a place where, as humanistic Jews, we can look to these characters and get some insight as to what our tradition teaches. That you have to learn from your mistakes. And even though we've learned that Jeroboam was nothing like he's described in the Bible, which is true of most of the stories of the kings. They're not at all what they're described in the Bible. The event might have taken place. We know that a lot of the events of the kings did take place, even though they're completely twisted around. Omri, for instance, might have been one of the greatest kings, but we only learned that he and his whole dynasty were just shvach. But when you read it narratively, and you're visiting and revisiting and revisiting these stories throughout your life, you find that there's a lesson here to learn from your mistakes. Teshuvah, the rabbi said, is not just about saying, I'm sorry I did that, please forgive me, let's move on. It's about demonstrating that you're not going to do it again. Maimonides gets into this very deeply. It's a very Maimonidean concept, and he's a person I think humanistic Jews can have a lot to learn from. The moral lesson is that if you are Jeroboam, now I'm talking about the fictional version of Jeroboam, if you are Jeroboam and the people of the north, you should not make the mistakes. All Jews should try not to make the mistakes. Because what was ultimately the punishment for the north? They were destroyed. And the people writing the final copy here, presenting the final edited copy, they knew the end of the story. And so in my sort of moralistic reconstruction of this whole journey that I've taken you on, it starts with a story that's a political story, a parody of a king they don't like for a lot of reasons. Nothing to do with calves, nothing to do with anything else. It has to do with building rival places and so forth, and sort of going against the whole principle that he was appointed by. And they know that the ending of the story justifies making him a bad guy and putting the entire tragic end of the northern tribes ultimately on his shoulders, because he didn't learn from the Jewish past. He didn't learn from the human past. We say in humanistic Judaism, and this is the nechemta, this is the little sermonic point. We say in humanistic Judaism that we don't take our values from the Torah, and that's true. But I do think we can take lessons from the Torah. But when I say take lessons from the Torah, I mean the whole Torah and the whole Bible and the whole understanding and knowledge of how the thing came together and what it was really dealing with. And in this case, the lesson that I think we can take away is the same as any sermonic lesson would be, which is that as humanistic Jews, we learn from human and Jewish experience. We have a lot of experience. Now, none of this happened, and certainly not in the way it occurred. But it's a story of what happens when you don't learn from experience. Because Jeroboam, he might have been a great guy. I have no idea. He might have been a terrific king. He certainly saved them from a lot of tsuris in the south. But as he's depicted in the Bible, he's an idiot who doesn't learn from this. who is egocentric, and as a result, some hundreds of years later, his entire kingdom comes crashing to the ground, and we've never heard from them again. The 10 tribes of Israel. It's our duty to look at these stories. I think our responsibility to look at these stories and see why the people put them where they put them and learn from them. And human experience, I think, was always at the forefront of their mind. And now I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. That was fascinating. Really appreciate it. I we have we can take some
Oh,
time
I
for
didn't even think about
questions.
questions. Sorry.
It's okay. Do folks have questions?
Everybody knows how much I hate teaching on Zoom, but this is the big exception I make. I can't imagine any of us love it, but it's definitely fun and it's a privilege to be able to do it for a big audience like this, an international audience.
Yeah, Libya.
All right. Well, I know it was a lot, so
Yeah.
probably no,
I mean,
no
I have
immediate
some questions
questions.
too, but
Oh, Eva's
I'm
got
gonna
a question.
well,
Okay.
so in order, it's
Yeah.
Liviu, R. Coleman, and Eva.
Okay. So
You gotta unmute. Can you
you
unmute
got to
Liviu?
unmute and do them fast.
Hel- Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
So, my question is, how do we know the story isn't written as we have the ending, which is the end of the Northern Kingdom, and we want a reason for it, and especially we want a reason from someone from with authority, so let's make him make the greatest sin we can find.
Because there were other well certainly that's the editorial thinking. I'm not denying that at all. But there were others that they could have pinned this on. There are no good kings in the north. None. Zero. They are all bad. They did what was evil in the eyes of Yahweh. So that's why I put it that way. The story seems older, and the placement seems to be very much in line with what you're saying. But that's why I don't think it was explicitly written at that time. There's other reasons not to think that, and it has to do with the style of the Hebrew and so forth as well. R. Coleman.
Um, Thank you for the narrative. I found it very interesting, fascinating. But as the rabbi say, you can always look at things in different ways. And as you were speaking, what I was thinking is that maybe the narrative, rather than try and bring Jeroboam down, it was really trying to bring Aaron down. Because when I look at the two brothers, there's Moses that has got no descendants, no mention, no memory, no
Yes.
nothing left from him, but he's depicted as this
Yeah.
highly moral
You're
person. And
right,
Aaron,
right. No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong. And just in the interest of time, that's why I told you about the Mushite group and why this was maybe a Mushite group. They may have also wanted Aaron to be bad. There's no question in my mind, and I'm sorry if that didn't come out more clearly, because I tried to emphasize that a little bit, but I know I gave a lot of information. Yes, they were also bad mouthing Aaron. Later, when the folks who were putting this in the Torah, they had to pick a place for it because it's really out of order. There's no good order on anything that happens after Genesis. Well, after the Exodus. So and to pick this place to put it was to say, yeah, we get it. He doesn't look so good. We're even going to turn that little quote, here's your God, O Israel, into something that everybody else said when it was clearly Aaron. They made that much of an editorial change because you can tell it was an editorial change. So yeah, this was coming down on Aaron as well too. There's a lot of stuff going on this, but that's in the earliest layer of the story. And then when we get to placement, no, the people who put it there were saying, great, 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 great Aaron, little blip, great, 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 great Aaron. And that's why they put it there. That's how they edited the book. And then later, as we see some of the retellers of the story emphasize the forgiveness of him, and one even just left him out altogether. Rabbi Goldfinger.
Thanks, Jeff. I really love some of the things that you shared with us because I never kind of thought of this story as having to do with Rehoboam and all of this. So when you started with the calf and the bull and all of this, the first thing that came to my mind was the ancient Mesopotamian roots of all of this, where the El god had two sons, Yahweh and Baal.
Yeah, that's the Canaanite pantheon that I was referring to.
Right. And so Baal became the god of the north, and Yahweh became the god of the south, the Israelites and the Judeans. So
That
I thought somehow you were going to connect that to that. So I was fascinated by the
That is
story.
very true, and I didn't do it because I only had time to just to really parenthetically talk about the whole. I've given whole lectures on the development of Pantheon, and I know you have too, and I've learned from you about them. There's only so much I can say in this particular lecture about it, but that is very correct. And what my main point was, this was not considered a sin. The calf was not a sin, and instead I chose the southern example of the churuvim because I was more interested in the animalistic or whatever you want to call it iconographic depictions of things that were meant to be associated with a god, also being seen like the throne or the crown as being part of that. But yes, what you're talking about in the north, that is in and of itself, three master's PhD level classes about how the Baal Yahweh split occurred, and yeah, and I'm very interested in that, but I just couldn't do it. I just couldn't make it work here. Just
Can I
wasn't
ask you
enough
one
time.
other question, very brief?
Yeah.
The cherubim, you kind of thought of them as animalistic, but weren't the cherubim like baby angels?
Well, angels are not necessarily depicted that way, in my understanding. These are sphinxes. These are people who have animalistic
Mhm.
characteristics,
Okay.
or an, or yeah, people with animal characteristics, or animals with people characteristics. Those are all sort of known generically, I guess, as sphinxes, and that's what this is, and that may have something to do with Egyptian influence as well. So that because I've also heard that there was some influence coming from that, but they're definitely have wings, so they're not people. And angels with wings don't seem to be biblical ideas whatsoever. That seems to be much later idea. I
Doing
think
good,
we
Paul.
do we have time for one more, Paul, or that's
Sure,
it?
go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, Aaron, I think it is.
Yeah. So I've always juxtaposed this story of the golden calf and Aaron, my namesake's involvement with the story of his two sons being wiped out by
That
God.
is
And
where the rabbis put it. Yes, the
yeah.
rabbis like to put it there.
So remind me which one went first. Again, was it the calf then the kids, or was it the other way around?
The calf and the kids. I think that what I have to go look up the Parshat because I'm not a good person for remembering how the order of the Torah.
Right. I don't
As
remember
far
either.
as I don't, I'd have to look it up. I want to say it was after, but there's, as the rabbis also say, there's no before and after in the Torah. So
Sure. Right. Time's all relative. As I always thought, like that was how Aaron paid for that sin, so to speak. And
it's a reasonable thing, but it's also that's sort of and I did it too. That's sort of a midrashic understanding.
right.
I'm looking up Aaron's sons right now to see what Torah portion they're in. We're talking about for those who know, we're talking about Nadav and Avihu, and what parsha it is in. Aaron and his sons. Oh, it's in Leviticus, so this is before. Yeah,
What is
I wanted
before?
to say Leviticus, but I'm always scared to death to say something that assured of myself when it comes to dates and things, especially when it's being recorded. So
Right, because there's a line in there that says, and Aaron was silent,
yeah,
which
and that's supposed to be
always
like
struck
him
me as like
mourning, sure.
he knew
Uh,
this was coming, kind of
Yeah,
like,
but
oh,
the real
right,
reason that's given in the Torah is the strange fire.
right.
That's why they're punished. But it's the karma blows back on him. But that's all midrashic. The Aaron silence is also midrashic. Not that there's not midrash built into the interstitially into the Torah as well, and other books. But I think I've sort of covered what was interstitial already, and I don't think that one was. I think that's a way later look at it. The
Okay.
Bible, the Bible is so clear that the sin of Jeroboam Nevat is what ultimately brought everybody down, and they were always doing it all the time.
Got it.
Is Jeroboam a historically verifiable?
We don't have his name on anything,
Okay.
so we can't say that for sure. But we have enough things that indicate to us that the dynasties of the North probably they existed. These are real names, and these may be sort of the contours of real events, the characterizations of them, the motivations of the people who did it, what they actually did, how they actually did it. The what they did is a little closer to perhaps verifiable in some contexts. It's very verifiable. This early, we don't have anything. This is just post-Solomonic, and we don't really have any good evidence of Solomon or David. The only evidence we have at all of David is the mention in the Tel Dan Stela, which was discovered by the man who got me up every morning at 3 a.m. to go dig at that damn place, Avraham Biran in Jerusalem at HUC. And that mentions Beit David, but some people say it doesn't. I think it does. But but I studied with the man, and he was a hero to me. So
Fascinating. Awesome. I'm sorry, Liviu, but I think we need to wrap it
okie
because
doke.
I want to be cognizant
Short,
of everybody's time. But
short question.
uh-huh. Okay, go ahead.
Well, Omri is the other guy we have archaeological evidence about
Yeah,
him,
no,
right?
there's other people, yes, and Omri is a very good example, but there are other people. I'm talking about the Davidic dynasty or Solomon. We don't have anything showing the existence of, well, we do have the dynasty, but we don't have David per se, and we don't have Solomon per se. So we don't have Jeroboam per se either, but that doesn't mean he didn't exist. I actually think that he probably did because it would be out of keeping that we'd have all these real people who existed that we do have corroboration for, and that this is the guy who didn't. And the fact that he did these things and is recorded as having done these things and that they're interpreted evilly as being his transgression may be an indication that he really did some of these things. We know that there was a shrine in Dan. I was there. I dug it up myself. I didn't find it. I just did all the extra crappy digging.
That's awesome. Well, I think this is fascinating. I think there can be a whole other series just about the relationship between history and myth and what has emerged and what we can't know for certain, those kind of things about who was who. But this was really interesting and a whole new perspective on the golden calf. So thank you so much for
Thank
this.
you. This was fun.
Yeah, and we'll be back again next month. In the meantime, I hope everybody has a wonderful Passover, and this will give you something to maybe show off during your Seder.
Chag Sameach,
Take
everybody.
care. Bye bye,
Bye.
everyone.